So when I was 17, I, like many of you guys, was deciding between two colleges. In my case, it was aerospace engineering at the Naval Academy or law at Oxford. And they seemed like such wildly different paths in life. And I so wanted to do both of them. And I couldn't. So I did what we've all been taught to do. I sat down and wrote a list of pros and cons. The Naval Academy meant the chance to be a naval aviator, to fly Tomcats off of aircraft carriers, and maybe someday to pilot the space shuttle. But I was scared that all that discipline would crowd out the arts and creativity. And I didn't know about being asked to fight for something if I didn't believe in it. And maybe most importantly, I was pretty sure I didn't want to make my bed with hospital corners every morning. On the other hand, Oxford was this life of intellectual exploration, of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, conversations about the meaning of things deep into the night. But I was scared that cloistering myself away in academia would start to be suffocating, and it would be hard to make a contribution in the world while studying things in the abstract. So as long as I spent on this list and as much advice as I asked from people I trusted, I didn't get any closer to making up my mind. And as a last-ditch effort, I signed up for a 2-week volunteer trip to Thailand, to the Burmese border. I'd been involved with the Burmese political refugee community in Washington, D.C. while I was in high school. And I figured maybe some geographic perspective would help make up my mind. So off I went on this American kid overseas journey with 14 other kids. And it was wonderful. And at the end of it, I was standing at the gate at Bangkok Airport, and the other 14 kids were on the plane, and the team leader, an amazing guy called Jeremy, says, "Amaryllis, get on the plane." And I had no idea I was going to do it that morning, but I said, "You know, I think I'm going to stay." And the poor guy is in loco parentis and not remotely comfortable with leaving a teenager in Thailand. But we talk, and the plane's leaving, and eventually he gets on it. And I walked out the automatic sliding doors into the sticky heat, and there are green taxis dropping off families in crates and suitcases. And I have this one thought going through my mind: okay, Amaryllis, what are you going to do now? Fast forward 15 years, and I can find in that moment the beginnings of my career, of my relationships, the beginnings of what keeps me up at night, what I teach my daughter, the books I choose to read. I can find the beginnings of who I am as a 32-year-old adult in that one single moment of terror and passion and conviction that swelled inside of me as I walked through those sliding doors into the sticky heat of a Bangkok afternoon. I was alone, abroad, with about $32 to my name. And I was operating on sheer gut instinct. Now, there's a lot of work that's been done to understand instinct. Scientists have noticed that when test subjects are shown dozens of numbers flashed on a screen too fast for them to memorize or do any kind of arithmetic, more than 90% can still say which side of the screen would add up to a higher number. In that same way, we've all had the experience of looking up when someone across the room is looking at us. Those are simple evolutionary instincts developed over time to help us survive. The ability to judge which food source has more and which has less without counting. The ability to identify and evade a predator. And they're important. But the moment of instinct I was following as I walked away from that gate was a different, more subjective kind. A judgment that might have been right for me while being wrong for somebody else. And that kind of instinct draws on a lifetime of accumulated experiences that are all quietly stashed away in our subconscious and broken down into chunks. And over time, as we're all busy living our lives, those chunks of experience begin to repeat themselves in fundamental but often imperceptible patterns. And it's those patterns that this kind of instinct can search and draw conclusions from, when your conscious mind might not even know they exist. When I walked through those sliding doors, I thought I was doing something groundbreaking, something completely different from anything I'd ever done in my life up till that point. But the instinct to do it was really strong. And the reason it was strong is because it wasn't all that groundbreaking after all. My mother was an actress and a poet and taught me from my earliest memories to seek out new experiences and new environments. And I had ample opportunity to do it because I moved every year of my childhood. My dad, on the other hand, was an economist and an entrepreneur and instilled in me this deep love for writing plans and building organizations and challenging the status quo. If I hadn't already admitted my age, I think the computer would have done it for me. I have this strong memory of being on holiday with my mother in Morocco, and she extended the trip spontaneously. And in the week that followed, both of us embarked on friendships that came to be really important to us later in life. Now, none of those random data points about my life occurred to me in the moment that I decided to stay. But they did occur to my subconscious. Somewhere deep in my inner brain circuitry, a program ran that identified what was necessary to stay. Adaptability, comfort in foreign environments, comfort with uncertainty, some ability to budget money, a desire to meet new people and see things through to fruition. And off it went, crunching through every experience and reaction and outcome of my 6,492 odd days on the planet. And the output from all those millions of inputs was, don't get on that plane. Now, would I have come to the same conclusion if I'd sat down cross-legged on the carpet in the airport and written a list of pros and cons? Maybe. But probably not. Because like those test subjects with the numbers flashing on the screen, there were too many millions of inputs for my conscious mind to process. That's where the subconscious mind kicks in. And I'm here to submit to you that it's smarter than you are. Or at least smarter than I was that day 15 years ago. So I walked out through the sliding doors, and I found my way to a long-distance overnight bus. And I pitched up the next morning in Mesad, which is a tiny town on the Thai-Burmese border, And I went to a refugee camp that was near one we'd volunteered at on the trip. Put me to work. I just need a place to sleep. And over the year that followed, I came to know many of the families that lived in that camp and to spend time in their homes and with their children and on their playing fields. And in the time that I was there, I also came to know a number of them that had sustained terrible injuries as a result of landmines along the border or at the hands of the military regime across the border in Burma. Alongside them, I came to be really good friends with a small group of Burmese political dissidents, young men mainly, who had come across the border mainly because there were death sentences on their head on the other side. And they were living in a treehouse on the Thai side of the border, publishing the Irrawaddy, which is the democratic newspaper in opposition, to peacefully document the crimes and the abuses that they had witnessed. Now, at first, they blindfolded me when they took me to this treehouse. But over time, we became friends. And eventually, we planned together to go into Burma and film an interview with Aung San Suu Kyi, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, who at the time was still under house arrest in the Burmese capital of Rangoon. Now, as the only member of this tribe that had not already run away from Rangoon at the hands of the government, I was the natural candidate to take the trip. But to do that, I needed a business visa, because as part of its closing to the world, Burma had stopped issuing student visas, had stopped issuing tourist visas. And as a 17-year-old kid living on the border, I wasn't sure how I was going to go about getting one, until I remembered an English investment banker named Daryl, who I had met for an hour a year earlier at a Burma conference in London. I knew he was passionate about Burmese democracy and about filmmaking, and I was pretty sure that because of his work, he had a better shot than I did at getting a business visa. So I called him, collect, from the Thai-Burmese border, and said, here's what we're up to. Would you consider taking 3 weeks off work, getting on a plane, coming to Thailand so that we can pretend to be married and go into Burma on your business visa? Which seemed reasonable at the time. And to Daryl's eternal credit, he did exactly that. So we landed in Bangkok, and we went to Khao San Road, where you can get forged anything, and got a forged marriage certificate. We bought Nivea face creams to sink film in and Bic pens to wrap film around. And we cut holes in our satchel so we could film while we were cycling. And on September 15th of 1999, we spent the afternoon with Aung San Suu Kyi in Rangoon, talking about Burmese democracy and the future that she envisioned for her country. Now, even though we knew we would get arrested when we left that building, which we did, we eventually managed to get the majority of that film out of Burma unscathed. And the BBC radio was able to broadcast it back into Burma on shortwave so that Suu Kyi's constituents could hear her speak openly and freely. 2 weeks after I left Burma, I started at Oxford. Not because I had chosen one of the two options I had at the beginning of this story, but because I'd found a completely different path in life altogether. One focused on international relations and human rights, peace, and security. And while I was there, I traveled back and forth to Southeast Asia, back to Burma, in fact, and to East Timor as a writer and a journalist. And that same path took me to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, where I studied international security, and to a career working 7 years in counterterrorism for the US government at home and overseas. Now I run a web startup committed to supporting global nonprofits through the cash that we all spend shopping online. It's the most authentically me life that I ever could have found. And I never would have found it at the end of a list of pros and cons. So now, as the mama of a 4-year-old wild coyote cub who was born in China and stopped strangers on the street to dance London Bridge, I find myself profoundly grateful to know that she, and that all of us, however different our lives and whatever choices we face, have within ourselves this superpower, this wise man under the banyan tree, this oracle of Delphi we call intuition. So when your instinct tells you to do something unreasonable, something off the beaten path, have faith that somewhere deep in your history, there are patterns that make you uniquely qualified to take the leap. Take it with both feet. You have no idea where it may lead, but wherever it does, I promise you, you'll come back with plenty of ideas worth spreading. There you go.